Hi everyone, Sat Sri Akal. Mera naam Takhtir Kaur Pandal hai. My name is Dr. Tak Kaur Bandel. I am so excited to invite you into this space and conversation on sustainability and anti-racism. And before I do so, just would love to share a bit more of an introduction to myself, to the land, and then invite my colleagues in who will be joining. So beyond my name, I use she, her pronouns. On the personal side, I am calling in from Halifax on Mi'kmaq Treaty Territories. I was born and raised on the West Coast, just outside Vancouver, on Katzie and Kwantlen First Nations lands, and very honored to be here due to my ancestors. And the majority of my ancestors come from the Punjab region of India and Pakistan on both sides of the border. And I'll share more about that story and lineage in a few moments. For our firm, BIPOC Executive Search, where I am currently a partner, we are based in Toronto, Canada, and we acknowledge that our main location is situated on the ancestral and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We honor that you all are the owners and original custodians of the land. And for all non-Indigenous members of our firm, we do and we will continue to honor the land's history, educate ourselves, and play an active role in redressing systemic, structural, and historical disadvantage facing Indigenous communities, and also continuing to support the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples. So thank you all so much for allowing me to be an uninvited guest on your lands. And now I would love to invite in my colleagues, Candace Frederick and Stacey Ann Buchanan, into the space. Welcome, Candace. Welcome, Stacey Ann. So excited to have you here. And we're going to be centering much of our conversation around this topic, an intersection of sustainability and anti-racism. And y'all, when we were chatting, Candace and Stacey Ann and I, about this live, we thought, what a good way to start, which is with our stories and what brought us into this space. So I'm going to pass it to you, Candace, and then Stacey Ann, to introduce yourselves, and also in that time share a little bit more about your story than what people typically hear or would know about you that has brought you to this conversation as well. So over to you, Candace.
Thanks so much, Tak. Hello, Stacey Ann. So lovely to be in this conversation with the two of you, especially because we've just had Earth Day. So this feels very fitting to be in this conversation for so many reasons. And, just wanted to start with some thank yous. Thank you to you, Tak, for opening up this space. And I think all of the ways that you've centered land and nature in many conversations. And Stacey Ann, also for the work that you've done around accountability and the environment and challenging ourselves to be different. And I think all of those things kind of set the tone for this conversation in a big way. So I just wanted to start with those acknowledgements. And in terms of, I guess, how I come into this conversation, so I think some of what you're going to learn about me today is that I am a big reader and documentary watcher and podcast listener, and all of those things influence how I think about both sustainability and anti-racism. And I think because of my background in health, a lot of my lens is like through, I think a lot about health inequities, social determinants of health. And so, often all of these non-medical factors that influence our health outcomes, that's what we're talking about with social determinants of health. And so, I'm thinking about large scale, like environment, but I'm also thinking about, safe neighborhoods and clean drinking water and how much that contributes to being a healthy person, but also to healthy communities. And people might be tired of me repeating this thing that I heard, but I just keep repeating it. So, but Dr. Rachel Hardiman, who studies health and racial equity in the United States, I've heard her say that 80% of health is actually social determinants of health, and 20% is genetics. And so when we're thinking about that 80%, that goes back to the safe neighborhoods and the clean drinking water and the affordable housing. And so this is all to say that I think how we sustain the earth and how we sustain ourselves, for me, that isn't separate. And so that's kind of where I land in terms of this topic, especially because we want to live and we want to thrive. And so when I'm thinking about, marginalized communities in particular, and specifically Black and Indigenous communities, like I am thinking about things like the fight for clean drinking water. And yes, that is true even in the context of Canada. And I think it's very important to say that. I'm thinking about, the fight for safe places to live. I'm thinking about who is impacted when there's an environmental disaster. And I'm thinking about this, also on like national levels. And also where we live and our proximity to like landfills. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. And more personally, I was born in Grenada. That's where my family is from. And I come from people who farm the land in terms of their own sustainability and how people looked after each other, the sharing of food in that, all of those things. And so, I think because of that, I've always understood that my personal survival is about how well I take care of the plants and the water and the trees and the flowers and the soil in a deep way. But I also want to be honest that this is a conversation that I'm still in with myself, and I'm still, thinking about actions that I can take in terms of what this could look like on both levels. But I also notice things like when I go to the farmer's market, I notice who's there and who isn't there, right? I notice the absence of often like Black and Indigenous farmers in that conversation. And I think about how that connects to, survival and legacy and, movements around like land back. So all of those things are maybe just some of the entry points for me into this conversation and things that have been on my mind for some time. So I'll stop there for now.
Thanks so much for sharing, Candace. I feel like I could have written down everything that you just shared. So much resonated in terms of the social determinants of health, how that in and of itself links racism and the impact of that on the land, on our own health and well-being. And I loved what you said about how we sustain the earth and how we sustain ourselves is not separate. They're interwoven. So thank you so much for sharing. Stacey Ann, over to you in terms of sharing a bit more about yourself and your entry point into this conversation as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to start by saying I'm so honored to be here and be in conversation with you two. It's just such an honor whenever we get together and we share space. As the audience may know, if you've been following us for the last almost 2 years, we've been doing this. You probably know by now that I'm the producer behind the live series. And so a lot of the times when we're doing the live series, the work leading up to it, I'm just so focused on making sure that, I have to do I have to run through the tech rehearsals all by myself and get everything done. And then the tech rehearsals with the team. And so today I decided that I'm going to show up a little bit different. And today I'm going to put a little extra care into how I showed up. So before I even got ready for this conversation, before I got ready today, I took a half an hour rest. I rested and then I got up and I nourished myself with some fried plantains. And I sat back and I ate, and I drank my water. I had some rice and some tin mackerel. If you know about tin mackerel, tin mackerel is a deal. And I nourished myself, and I said, I'm going to come into this conversation and I'm going to come into it taking care of myself. Because whenever I talk about sustainability, to me, I always think about our mind. As a mental health advocate, it's very important that sustainability for me is first taking care of ourselves. In order to take care of the land and the animals and everything, we have to take care of what's within. And so I always look through the lens of the importance of rest and also the importance of ancestral well-being and our ancestral stories, and how those stories, because history has erased so much, how those stories is what we really need to really sustain and to move forward. So, and in doing so, in a climate right now that is it's in this political climate, it's in this era where the colonial lens have been slowly lifting, and the veil of shame around mental health amongst racialized individuals is slowly shifting as well. It's really, really important that we implicate radical self-care. It is so important. It's so easy and to get caught up in getting flustered and getting so caught up in the world. Like I'm trying to, like, let me break it down. It's so hard every day to get up as a Black woman and doing the work that I'm doing. When I'm saying doing the work that I'm doing, I'm talking about everyone that does the work in anti-racism, environmental justice, decolonizing, and trauma response therapy, and in that sort of field. It's so important for us, because we're giving so much of ourselves. It's so important for us to have that sustainability within ours, and then we can be of great service to those around us and to the land. I'm coming through the lens too of someone that was raised in Jamaica. So I was raised for almost 15 years of my life, and then I moved here to Canada. So I was raised on, I used to say a big yard, but thinking back, it is a farm. So my grandparents had cows, we had goats, we had chickens, and we had pigs. And we were one of the more well-off family in our neighborhood, but we were also really poor. But I saw how my grandfather toiled the land and how he took care of the land. Every morning we'll get up and we'll sweep the land. So we'll break branches from a tree and tie it together into a broom and damp the land with water and sweep it so that we're not making too much dust. I saw how my grandfather planted pretty much everything that we grew up with. I saw how much my grandmother was so much of a community, how much collective care was really injected into her system. So we sold eggs, and the families couldn't afford the eggs, she would give the eggs away. We sold ice because we were one of the only families in our neighborhood that had a refrigerator, that even had electricity. And it was always shared amongst others. I grew up in an environment where everything is shared. And so moving to North America, things were a little bit different because things were faster and it was more like a convenience, but you also left out the part of sustainability, in a sense of really caring for others, caring for yourselves, and caring for the land, and looking at the land as like, I am with you, you are with me, we are together, And so I'm coming through the lens of growing up back home in the Caribbean, growing back home in Jamaica, coming here and then doing the work on mental health. And my work is primarily rooted in mental health in the Black community and decolonizing mental health. So I always look at it from a place, first of all, a sustainability of one's mind and how we can keep going and moving forward. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does, Stacey-Ann. And thank you so much for sharing all of your stories. Every time you tell stories of the yard and growing up back home, I've started saying, oh, I got to go change into my yard clothes now. Ever since you introduced me to that term, it's so like, as you share it, Stacey-Ann, I can like visualize myself, and I feel at peace when you speak about just being with the land and slowing down. And the piece that I wrote down was around radical self-care and rest, and how you always center that in our conversations, because I find that the way that the corporate world and even government sector, public sector, nonprofit sector in the borders of Canada and the US operates, and elsewhere in many settler colonial contexts, where it's this intention and expectation of constant, linear, and exponential progress and success. So we imagine the curve going up, yes, And what I love about what you remind us is that we actually need to live cyclically, just in the way that the earth operates cyclically. And that down cycle is the rest and recovery. It's the slowing down. It's the taking care of ourselves. It's the nourishing our body and eating the plantain and eating, I think you said canned mackerel, which I definitely need to try now. So thank you so much, both. In terms of what came up for me as you both were speaking from my stories, one, it's about seeds from my mom, and the other is about oceans and sea level rise. So the first piece, I shared that my ancestors are from the Punjab region of India and Pakistan. It's 5 rivers. Punjab means 5 rivers. So it's the land of the 5 rivers. And it's very, very, very fertile land, or has been for literally thousands of years now. But now folks, because of the impact of either over farming, the impact of how the free markets have played out in South Asia, there's this almost death of Punjab. And it's like sad. And I feel like a lot of us are still grieving around it in terms of what has been happening to the farming community. And so a lot of folks are still doing that, but left in the 80s and 90s for many ways, for many reasons, because of the political turmoil there in the state. And so my family left in the 80s, and my mom still does a lot of farming and gardening, and she has seeds hidden around the house. So that's my inheritance from her. Many other things. I'll get some Tupperware and like lovely clothes, I'm sure. But she's like, just look for the seeds. I've placed them in various places around the house. I don't know what kind of seeds they are, but it just reminds me of that connection to the land and the importance of it in our lives, especially when we think about ancestral lineages. And then the other piece that I'll bring in here, that when you were speaking around social determinants of health, Candace, and how racism has played out, it reminded me of the 2018 Vancouver City election. And my friends had convinced me to run because I was the only person who was a citizen and so was legally allowed to run for council. Many of my friends were international students, many of them racialized and BIPOC, whereas the Vancouver electorate, for the most part, is very white, I'll say. And because of that, the outcome of the election was as such as well. There was very little to no representation. And I just remember at that point, there's a walk along the seawall in Vancouver, folks know it, along False Creek, on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And there's a bridge, and along the bridge, an artist has painted different shades of blue representing what sea level rise will be like in the next few years. And I just remember that moment of the election happening, feeling this moment of like, oh, because many of the folks who were racialized were the ones who were advocating for climate justice and hadn't been elected in. And so I think the work that we do here at the firm, and that everyone listening who's part of our network, who's bringing in those multiple worldviews and ancestral worldviews into your organizations, it's not just about the representation in terms of like our physical selves, but as Stacey Ann mentioned, it's also like the minds, the spirits, the souls and ways of being that we're bringing in. So thank you both so much for sharing. In terms of the next segment, we have some clips and resources to share with you all. We're all huge nerds in many different ways. So we have a movie clip, we have a podcast clip, we have a song as well. And Candace, I would love to pass it on over to you to introduce your clip, and do take some time to share, about the context, and then we'll share the clip with the community as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tak. So I think I've already said that I love film and I love documentary. And so the clip is from a film called There's Something in the Water. And essentially it centers around environmental racism in Nova Scotia. And I think, personally for me, as someone who lives within the borders of the Canadian context, like thinking about how this conversation is playing out on these lands is really important. And so this film has come about as a result of the work by Dr. Ingrid Waldron, who maybe will see this, who studies environment and race in Canada. And so we're going to play just a very small segment, but maybe I'll just add that there are some takeaways like in the film overall around postal code and the connection to health. And specifically when looking at Indigenous and Black communities who tend to be like near hazardous sites, and how that's then impacted like personal health, like in terms of cancer, and not just health outcomes, but like literally we're talking about life and death. So that's the context of like this film, and just some pieces around what you can expect if you watch the whole thing.
Back in the day when they said that it would have no impact, this is what we're left with. All this is blown over into our community. So not only are we suffering knowing that, this exists to our water, and look at our air as well. And yeah, it's sad.
Do you worry about your own health?
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because just knowing, where I came from, and, the family that's gone before me, and I've never expected to live long. I'll be 41, next week. And knowing that, everybody, passed away so young, I had always felt that, I wasn't going to get a chance to grow old. And some.
Yeah. So, I've seen that so many times, and each time I see it, it just shreds my heart, And I think for me, like we have to, I think, feel the impact in order to sometimes really incite us to take an action. And I think that this is a piece of work that gets us to feel the impact and to see that we're talking about certain communities who are impacted. So in this case, Black and Indigenous. We're talking about being on the receiving end of having housing, but then having housing that's close to like a landfill or something that impacts your health. And so I think when we're thinking about like environment, like, yes, there's this piece around housing and where you live, but for me, it's still connected to that overall conversation that we're in around even environments in like workspaces and, and the responses that we need to have in order to address the issues, but we have to know what the issues are. So that's all connected to the same conversation for me very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that clip, Candace, and for naming that piece around like we almost, and not almost, we do need to in some ways like feel the pain of that wounding to be able to take that action. And I also so appreciate the piece that you raise about rather than just digging ourselves into the sand and being like, oh, I'm not going to pay attention, to be able to tolerate and build our uncomfortability and discomfort with knowing what is going on in the world, because we don't know. Like even growing up on the West Coast in Vancouver, it wasn't until I moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, that I even learned the story of Africville, for example, that is featured in that film as well, that Dr. Waldron speaks of, and many communities and activists here have spoken out about and continue to do so. And, I remember visiting the Africville Museum here, and if folks come visit, please go to the museum and pay your respects. Just seeing this image of at the point when the city of Halifax had decided they were basically just going to bulldoze down people's houses in the middle of the night, that they sent garbage trucks to gather the things. So just like the symbolism of all of that is, I think, speaks to exactly what you're sharing around social determinants of health, around that pain, and around what we can do to continue to expose ourselves so that it doesn't become something we ignore until it's too late, and we're taking that responsibility. So thank you so much for sharing, Candace. I believe, Stacey Ann, it's my clip next, but I'll provide a bit of context before we share. So the clip that I am sharing is a short piece from a podcast called How to Survive the End of the World. And I was talking about the city council election. That's actually the time in 2018 when the election happened. I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to start prepping for the climate change apocalypse, people. And I came across this podcast, How to Survive the End of the World, with Adrienne Maree Brown and her sister, Autumn Brown. And they're both so amazing. So please go back in the archives and listen. And this episode with movement generation really stood out to me because there was a moment in which the guests shared that 90% to 95% or so of language diversity is going to be lost in the next generation. So the languages that we speak. And at the same time, I was thinking about my biology degree, learning about evolution, learning about the loss of species, and how we've also seen a similar extinction and loss of species diversity. And what does that mean in the context of the work, for example, that we do at BIPOC Executive Search? So this podcast episode for me really encapsulates, that reality where she just really tells us what's going on, but then also that softness that's brought in terms of, rather than using like fear mongering, this is a reality, but then how do we use our ancestral ways of being to tend to this in a way that doesn't then reproduce colonization when we're attempting to address climate change and sustainability in the environment as well. So I'll leave it there and pass it over to you, SA, to share the clip.
Still how we approach it. And I think, as organizers especially, we're so quick to jump to what's the strategy, what do I need to do to take care of this? Yeah. And in a way, it's like Adrienne and I are here at a generative somatics conversation, and I've learned so much from how we think about the body and how we think about our movements. And it's like, what's actually at our backs, and can we just feel into the despair, the grief that humanity does have to actually feel about the loss of species and the polluting of water and all of these things, right? In order to then step to the strategies from a much more grounded and holistic place, right? Because it's not just coming from like, what do our campaigns have to teach us, right? It's like, what do our ancestors have to teach us?
That's right.
What does the soil have to teach us? And so that continues to be our methodology, and we encourage people to go deep and feel. And I think the piece that's really critical to that, and we get asked this question a lot, is like, especially young people are having so much despair around being alive in this time on the clock of the world, as our elder Grace Lee Boggs taught us, right? That it's important to feel the despair, but it's also really important to do that in community with folks and on land that can hold us.
Yes.
So,
I love that.
Thanks so much for sharing, Stacey Ann. And in terms of what I would follow up with that, it reminds me as well, one of my teachers, Dr. Cash Ahenekyu, who's based out at UBC, he taught me about the soul wound. And it was originally sort of written about by Eduardo and Bonnie Duran, who wrote a book in 1995 called Native American Post-Colonial Psychology. And it's just like a decolonial nerd's dream, y'all, if you're interested in mental health and psych. And in it, Eduardo and Bonnie, and then Cash's work speaks to this idea of the soul wound, that the impact of colonization has actually created like a deep fissure in our collective consciousness. And it's up to us to be able to do the healing work, to grieve, to be able to release anger, resentment, shame, like all of the trauma as well, in order to get to the point of getting to the solution and manifesting those sustainable futures as well. So what I love that they speak to in the podcast is this notion of taking, in some ways, accountability, however we identify, as settlers, as arrivants on this land, or as Indigenous peoples, that I'm speaking for myself, that I, as a settler, take responsibility to heal the trauma so that, again, I don't just reproduce the same violence in some ways on the land. And I will wrap up there. I feel like I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but on healing, which is that some of the time we need to do that healing, because Stacey Ann's going to share with us in a few minutes after she shares her clip some examples of things that we can do to take action, to create space for sustainability. And Stacey Ann shared that with us as a team in a lunch and learn, and she assigned all of us something to do, a challenge. And mine was to go around my neighborhood and pick up garbage and litter off the ground, which I was like super excited about, and I did it. But it was interesting, there was days that I didn't do it because I was scared of what people would think of me as I was doing it. And part of it was my racialized identity. It was like this strange healing of trauma that I had to get over myself, to just be like, I'm just going to go out and pick up some garbage off the land. So I'm going to invite you all to, when you think about that podcast and think about what I just shared, to just notice what's that resistance or what's that healing that's coming up for you, that's perhaps blocking you from taking that action that's aligned with your heart and what you'd like to do in relation to sustainability. So I'll leave it there and pass it over to you, Stacey Ann, to introduce your clip and then share it.
Sure. Thank you, Tack. My clip is from one of my favorite artists, reggae artists, called Chronixx. And the song is called Capture Land. And in Jamaica, capture means stolen. So it's pretty much stolen land. And the song, I've never heard a song like this before in my life that I'm so deeply connected to. The song is basically a history lesson, like a short, brief history lesson. And he talks about the West, and he talks about North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, how all of that land is stolen land, and how the land went from being stolen from Indigenous folks. And so it went from being, and he said it in the song, went from being a paradise to a plantation. He talks about, he pays homage to Indigenous sovereignty in the song, and also homage to Marcus Garvey's, the Black nationalist, and who's also a national hero of Jamaica. And he talked about Africa is for Africans and the Back to Africa movement. And so he talks about that in the song. He talks about the land and caring for the land. And when I first heard the song, the words didn't really capture me as much as I dive deeply into my work. And so it's one of those songs that it's a ritual for me. Every time I have a workshop that's coming up, something that I'm doing around my mental health advocacy or whatever it is, it's just such a song that speaks so deeply to my soul. And I also chose the song too, because he sings the song in Patois. And a part of sustainability for me is to always be able to speak in my dialect, to be able to speak in Jamaican dialect. Like it makes me feel so much at home, and there's something about it that just speaks to my ancestors and speaks to my well-being. So I love this song, and I don't want to get too much into it, but I want to share it all for you. So sit back, and here we go.
Dread and terror pandemic. Good God of grace, will I have His mercy. I miss an old slave driver. Time is catching up on you. driver. I know your sins, them are on. So carry we go home. I bring the brown east. Well, come on, a Rasta man. A Rasta no live on no capital land. Oh, you mean? Carry we go home. Oh, you mean? I said we settle and cease. Well, come on, a Rasta man. A Rasta no live on no capital land. Well, Lord America a capital and the whole of Jamaica a capital and a long time them want trick the Rasta man. Like them no know say that man a real African. You think me no member King Ferdinand and thief in Columbus have a golden plan. They make a wrong turn and end up in Caribbean. One Ras then a side kill enough Indian. And turn paradise in a plantation and bring cross one ship load of African. Now here comes the thief in Queen from England. Now she Cromwell and Henry Maga. Century on top of century full of separation. And after 400 years me send a reparation. I know them want to kill me with the taxation. But I beg you please take me to the motherland. I beg you carry me go home. I bring me brown east. Well, come on a Rasta man. A Rasta no live on no capital land. Coulda never carry me go home. I said we settle and cease. Come on a Rasta man. A Rasta no live on no capital land.
Yes. So even in the song, Chronix talks about, after 400 years, there's no reparations. He really dives deep into giving you a history lesson into one song. And I connected with this so much because my dad is a Rastafarian, is a Rasta man. And so I grew up seeing my uncles as Rastafarian. And in the time when I grew up seeing my uncles as a Rastafarian, it was really looked upon in Jamaica, down upon. I mean, Rastas went through a genocide themselves where they were cutting off their locks and even killing them because they just didn't understand their ways of living. I remember seeing my uncle, things that he will do was so beautiful to me. Like, for instance, I never seen him brush his teeth at all with like a toothpaste. He always used a chew stick. And he had the whitest teeth you could ever imagine. My father, when we talk about Rastafarian and it's a movement and it's a lifestyle. It really truly is a lifestyle, not so much of a religion, but a lifestyle. And when I think about sustainability, besides the mind, the second thing that comes to mind is how Rastafarians live, because they are one with themselves and one with each other and one with nature, and one with God. And so it's in that they live a harmonious life, and so my dad, for instance, like, he lives here, but my dad is so different. My dad collectively came together with a brethren of his, so friend, brethren, and they bought an acre of land. And they use that land and they plant on that land. So in the summertime, he plants and he goes there and he reaps. So he plants his thyme. Candace, I know you love some thyme. He does Scotch bonnet pepper, corn, pumpkin, just everything. My dad's true motto in life is like, if you want to live longer, you'll grow your own food and cook your own food. That's it for him. My dad doesn't go to restaurants. And if we're doing a celebration and if he does go, he just orders water. Like, seriously, he will make sure that he eats from home and orders water. A part of that too, when we talk about sustainability, he just feels like the rest of the bill could come up to $1,000, $200. And he's like, do you know how many people you could feed with that money? Do you know what you could do with that money? And so that's his belief. And I love that for him. And I love that I'm able to be a part of that life too, and also share in his wisdom. And when we talk about wisdom, we had a conversation before. I remember every time my dad will teach me something, it was always when we're going for a drive or when we're at the table eating. That's when I retained the most information, the most ancestral wisdom, is when he cooks. Or sometimes I'm just sitting by the table and he cooks. Because when I'm around my dad, I'm gonna let you do all the cooking because my dad is a phenomenal cook. And he's also, he doesn't eat meat as well, but he can cook you the best oxtail, curry goat, a jerk chicken without even tasting the food. He's just that good. But so yeah, this song speaks to me in so many ways, and so many times whenever I listen to it, there's something, it just tugs at my heart. You know how you have that your Spotify playlist? I'm gonna wrap this up. You know your Spotify playlist, and so Spotify does this yearly thing where they tell you how many songs you listen to or which song you listen to the most. Every year, that song is like number one. So I wanted to share that, and I want to invite the audience, when you get a moment, look it up and listen to it. And you can even find the lyrics that's translated into English for you to understand the song. It really is a great history lesson and such a powerful song. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Stacey Ann. I feel like even just the earlier conversation around language diversity, like I so appreciate you bringing song into this and the storytelling, which I know that you always remind us of as well, as how poetry and storytelling can be such a good way to teach and bring folks along. And I love the musical element and the pleasure element of it in some ways. And now I'm just incredibly hungry and want goat curry. So that's what I'll be doing after this evening. And we actually have some actions for you all to take. Everyone listening, we have shared our stories. We have shared some clips that introduce you to perhaps different conversations around sustainability and anti-racism. And part of this is taking action. Of course, we are taking action in terms of, influencing policymakers, literally making change in terms of who is at the senior leadership table. And you all do that work as well. So going at that top level, at the systems level, and how do we change the system? And then we also can take that personal responsibility, on the ground, closer to the land, in terms of what can we do in our everyday life to gesture and take action and aligned action towards sustainable futures, towards anti-racist futures, and the intersections of the two. So I will pass it on over to Stacey Ann to share 15 ways that you can do so. And then we'll have a challenge and explain the challenge for you after she shares. But just in brief, essentially, we're going to invite you to choose one, at most two, and do it for 7 days. I'll pass it to you, SA, to share.
Thank you, Tak. Okay, so we're going to get into 15 ways to reduce waste and sustainability. These are some tips that you can do. So you can bring your own shopping bags, carry reusable straws, coffee cups, and water bottles. You can save and reuse gift bags. You can opt to have your bills delivered electronically. Wash your clothes in cold water and or hang them to dry. I will tell you this, when you hang your clothes out to dry in the sun, when we get sun here in Canada, please do it. It's just a different feel. Repurpose old things, like using old teas as cleaning rags or food containers as storage containers for other things like office supplies. Donate your old goods. Old clothing, furniture, books, and really anything can be donated. It's better than throwing it away and can help someone in need. You can use reusable rags and cloths also for cleaning. Buy foods with little or no packaging. Recycle the right way. Reduce food waste by composting any residual food scraps. Repurpose all old clothes and opt out of buying fast fashion, or you can buy secondhand clothes. Use 100% recycled and unbleached toilet paper. You can photocopy and print on both sides of the paper, and you can make your own DIY cleaning solutions, makeup, lotion, toothpaste, deodorant. I could tell you something about toothpaste. You can use baking soda, or you can use coconut oil. It's really good at giving you that white teeth and cleans your teeth really well. And now here is a fun part. These are some things that you can do. These are some challenges that you can do. And while I'm sharing these, I want you to know that we'll also create a post, and because we're all about accountability here, and just to remind you that these are some things that you can do. So compost. If you haven't started it, please do so. Invest in a tumbler or an enclosed bin and put your food scraps into it. Composting really helps cut back on food waste and gives you an amazing soil conditioner for free. Your plants will absolutely thrive in homemade compost. Another thing you can try is to buy less. Do not bring anything into your home that is not a necessity, like food. Wait before making a purchase to make sure it's something you truly need. You can conserve on water, save the water you use to wash your produce, to water your plants, and take shorter showers. Try to give yourself 5 minutes max. Okay, and these are challenges. Like I said, you could do these for a week and then you'll see. Pick up litter. This is the one that TAC was assigned. If you see any litter in your neighborhood or during your walks, etc., please pick it up and dispose of it properly. You can fight food waste. You can do this in a number of ways, such as, saving your leftovers. I save my leftovers all the time and I just repurpose them into something so nice. Meal planning around what you already have in your fridge, and eat everything you buy at the grocery store. Or if you have it via takeout. If you dine in and you cannot finish your meal, please ask for leftovers to be boxed. Another thing, reduce the amount of electricity that you use. Turn off all the lights in a room when you're not in it, okay? Shut down your computer at night. That's also a form of maintaining your computer's health. Choose better lighting options. LED bulbs being the best choice. They use 75% less energy than incandescent bulbs. Use a power strip to reduce your plug load. Reduce the amount of time you leave the air conditioner on. Instead of turning the thermostat up, try other methods of staying warm, like putting on more clothes and using blankets. Another trick too is to plug out all your appliances and plug things out when you're about to sleep, right? It really saves as well. No paper towel. This is a no paper towel challenge. This is for me because I like to use so much paper towels. Your challenge is to use cloth napkins, both at home or out. Bring a couple napkins with you. Opt for organic cotton and linen material whenever possible, as these are compostable and at the end of life. Friendly dishwashing, okay? We can opt for biodegradable, eco-friendly dish soap. No use of the dish washer. You can have a half fill the sink with water and then wash the dishes in the sink. When all the dishes are washed up, opt for little water running, then rinse them off. Up for eco-friendly sponges as well. And last but not least, and I hope I didn't run through this too fast, but just so you know, I will have these in a post on our page and you can always go back to them. Remember to bring your reusable bags. Your challenge is to remember to bring your reusable bags with you to the grocery store and figure out which method works best for you. One trick is that I keep one in my purse. I have a big purse, or I keep one in my car, in either my glove compartment or by the side of the door. So in case I forget, it's always in the car. You can put it in the trunk. Just keep one with you. Spend your dollars wisely. So every day we get to choose what type of world we want to live in with our choices. So when it comes to making purchasing choices, try to buy from ethical brands. Look for brands that give back to causes, brands that pay a living wage, and brands that have a mission statement around sustainability. And I believe that's it, TAC.
Thanks so much for sharing, Stacey Ann. Such helpful tips and tangible ways that we can actually take action today. And I invite folks to choose some that are oh, that's an easy thing, I can do that, so that you can build the habit and then, take on some of the more challenging pieces of it as well. I know I specifically wore my sustainable clothes today, Stacey Ann, thinking about this lesson that you were going to share with us. And so as Stacey Ann mentioned, we will be posting all of those on our social media channels. We are all over social media, y'all. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We even have a TikTok channel that I hear is freaking amazing, and I know is freaking amazing. So I want to shout out Stacey Ann, Zoe, Avery, everybody who contributes to that. So it will be on social media in terms of the posts, and then choose one thing and see if you can do it for 7 days. Set that intention, whether that's turning off the light after you leave a room. My partner is guilty of that all the time. I see lights on in the house and I'm going around turning them off. Whether that's composting, whether that's bringing a takeout container with you to bring your leftovers if you eat out. Stacey Ann mentioned that great example of the reusable bag as well. And I know, Candace, you had a challenge as well when Stacey Ann assigned one to all of us. Do you want to share a little bit about yours?
Yeah, mine was around like ethical spending and like really thinking about like supporting sustainable brands. So with that, that does mean it is a bit of a research challenge, right? So it's not just like a challenge in terms of because you have to find the places, do some additional research and look into kind of like what they stand for. But also, so many of these places are online, they're on Instagram. And like for me personally, I kind of like took that a step further and I ended up supporting a lot of spaces that are Indigenous or Black owned and are connected to food movements because I love to eat. So I'm always thinking about food. So that seemed like a very natural connection for me. But I think thinking about that is really important because as much as, you know, I like going into the shops and just like picking something off the rack, I do, you know, I do want this earth to be around for a long time and past the time that I'm on it. And so I feel like it was an important way for me to do my part and to think about, you know, how I could spend in a different kind of way. So thank you, Stacey Ann.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, both of you. I know we're pretty much at time now, and I'm just going to invite folks to say that the energy that we put out there, so even in relation to what Candace just shared around money and how we invest our money, is when we put that energy out there, we're going to get that back. So the universe will send us more money to support more sustainable and BIPOC owned businesses or whatever feels aligned with you. So thank you both so much for everything that you shared on this live. To everyone listening, thank you so much for commenting, for sharing space with us. We are sending so much love and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.